Hi there, and welcome back to the Fuse Show. Today I'm joined by Erkang Zheng. Erkang is the CEO and founder of JupiterOne. He is a hands-on leader in cybersecurity, an engineer by trade, and an entrepreneur at heart. He is passionate about technology and solving real-world challenges. He's currently building a cloud-native security platform, JupiterOne, to deliver knowledge, transparency, and confidence to every digital platform in every organization, large or small. He's also the author of securitymanifesto.net. Thanks for joining us in the show.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here. Glad to share some of my stories.
I love it when a lot of entrepreneurs create a manifesto either for themselves or an industry at large. At what stage did you just decide to write a security manifesto, and what inspired you to do it?
Yeah, it's funny that you picked up on that, right? So I think it was from my former CISO role, right? So to give you guys a little background, right? So I didn't just jump in and create a product and create a business. So I've had throughout my career, I've been a security practitioner, a former CISO, and at the time I left Fidelity and went to a startup, right? So called Lifomic as the CISO there. And back in my days at IBM and Fidelity, I've had challenges in folks going through digital transformation, right? So I've seen this, and you probably have seen this as well. There's this somewhat of a contention and sometimes a bit of a headbutting between the engineering team and the security team, right? And as an industry, we all wanted to find out a way and say, hey, how can these two organizations work better and collaborate and empower and enable the business and not just be blockers, right? So not just kind of ask people to jump through hoops without the necessary reasons. So as I was starting to rebuild a security organization from the ground up, I was thinking, I really need some guiding principles, right? So what were those? And that's how I started the Security Manifesto. And from a way that really highlights the need for a more modern and automation-centric way and to approach security in general.
So what made you decide to create something and put there publicly versus just writing this down in your personal journal?
Yeah, I think this is an industry problem, right? So I think I had even before that, right? So I wrote a blog that describes the current state of the cyber security, and I called it a pandemic at the time. So that was I think 4 or 5 years ago when I wrote that blog, right? So that was a year before I put out the manifesto, and the reason really is, we can do a lot of things internally, right? So with internal resources and do it right, but if we don't try to proactively and share that and influence the industry to go the right way, I think we're doing ourselves a disservice, right? So by, security teams traditionally has this tendency of, behind closed doors, right? That's how they operate, more secretive and more, that type of operating model and that type of mindset. In comparison, the engineering teams has transitioned into a more, collaborative, open. There's the DevOps manifesto and there's stuff like that, right? So how do you enable collaboration? I feel the need to try to get my thoughts out there, right? So because I think I'm not the only one, but there are a lot of people that's thinking the same. So I actually work with a few folks, right, including the CISO and co-founder at Signal Sciences at the time, right? So Zhang, right? So who Signal Sciences went on and got acquired by Fastly, right? So as I worked with him and a few others a little bit to come up with, hey, does this resonate? Because this is what I want, right? Does this resonate in your organizations and others? And overwhelmingly, the answer is yes. So we say, well, we should put it out there and for other people to chime in and consume.
And is it the idea that you get feedback and you update it over time, or is it how do you manage that website, or how do you what do you envision for its future?
That I think has good high level principles, right? So I don't know if we want to just kind of read it out loud a little bit, right? So that people know what we're talking about, right? So it doesn't really require a lot of update, and to be honest, I have made slight wording tweaks, but haven't had major updates to it. It really has 6 things. I'll read it out real
Sure.
quick, right? So I said, we believe modern cybersecurity, especially for digital companies with cloud native operations, requires a different mindset and operating model such that, right, these 6 things. Assume compromise, but expose no single point of compromise. Track everything, since you cannot protect what you can't see. Engage everyone, for there is power in the crowd. Two is stronger than one. Automation is key because people don't scale and changes are constant. Build products that are secure by design and secure by default. Favor transparency over obscurity, practicality over process, and usability over complexity. Right? So to sum that up, right, so we must keep security simple, open, collaborative, enabling, and rewarding. Right? So part of this is, I think security in general has this kind of dark cloud looming over it, somehow, right? So, products out there and even internal organizations to get budget, they sell on the FUD, right? The fear, uncertainty, and doubt, right? So that's how you sell products, and that's how you get budget. I think that's completely wrong or an outdated approach, right? So we should think about, how do we collaborate? How do we reward people by doing the right things rather than punish people for doing the wrong or making mistakes, right? Take the other way around and take that more rewarding and enabling approach to it. Right, so that's the driving mindset and principle behind these the manifesto here, and that's also what went into building the product of become JupiterOne.
Going, I guess, down memory lane, what was your first branching point in your career where you decided to branch off of I guess more generalized software and specialize on security?
So I think it really goes back to solving my own challenges, right? And being a practitioner, and first and foremost, I feel like I have an unsolved challenge for my own operations, and I've been in large enterprises, IBM, Fidelity, and so on, right? So, and also startups, and at my IBM days, I was leading multiple global practices in the consulting practice. So I've worked with a lot of Fortune Global 2000 type of firms, and I've seen over and over again that security teams try to engineer this themselves, right? So a lot of that is recreating the wheels, but still things are kind of patched together with duct tapes and your own not perfect scripts. And I think that's what I see as the opportunity, right? So to solve my own challenges, right? So if I've lived through these for over a decade, what's better than creating this and solve that challenge than something else in general, right? So I could certainly technology is technology, software is software. Right? So I have plenty of other ideas, and we can do a mobile app and we can do something else, right? But I think this to me is more meaningful, and to the community and in the industry, I think is more meaningful.
So how did you take this, I guess, more corporate path for a while also knowing that you're an entrepreneur at heart? When did you when did you start feeding the entrepreneur fire within you?
That's a great question. I don't know. I don't know how that got started, right? So I think, for the most part, it is the builder in me that starts to take over, right? So, and over the past times, right? So years at different roles, I've also always built internal products, internal tooling, try to make things more efficient and automate and so on, right? And I think that's part of the engineering in me speaking. Right. On the entrepreneur side, I think, I don't know, I think it just goes back to maybe even a little bit of the story before, right? So we're talking about going down memory lane, right? So if I want to go real way back, and this may be an Asian thing, you're an Asian, I'm Asian, maybe you can probably relate, is my parents and my family wanted me to be either a doctor or a lawyer, right? And I was like, no, I don't know if that's what I wanted to do. And it seems really hard, that's you have to study multiple years after college and do all of these kind of bar exams and medical things and residencies, and I don't know, it's too hard, right? And then the other thing that kind of bothers me was as much as I love the idea of saving lives and helping patients, and as a doctor, I actually, when I was a kid, I wanted to do it, right? So not family wanted to do it. I wanted to do it. But, it felt to me over time was what really can I do as a doctor, right? I can't save lives, and that's inevitable, right? People are gonna die, and to put it bluntly. So so I want to do something else. I don't want to face that, right? So maybe it's sort of the lack of courage in me to face that. But then over time in security, I kind of find myself in an interestingly similar position, right? So I mentioned to you this industry is having this dark cloud over us, right? So this, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and it also becomes breaches are inevitable, right? And it felt like I just escaped one inevitable to join the industry of another inevitable. So that's where sort of the entrepreneur sort of part that came to me is it was like, not only do I want to build this for my role, for my job, for my organization, I wanted to do something for this industry because that's not what I signed up for. I signed up for something that I want to create meaningful changes at a broader scale, and that I guess is the long answer to what you were asking.
Gotcha. Did you did you know that when you were a student, or did you know that you would, I guess, take the path that you, or I guess handle things as they come to you, or did you plan out for like, oh, 10 years from now I want to do X, Y, and Z?
Not really, not really. I think there's a progression, right? So I was very much an engineer and introvert before, right? So I then later on in my career went into consulting, but I kind of maybe, right? So to some extent, I kind of purposely kind of train myself or position myself to do this, right? So eventually, I I think subconsciously I've always known at some point I'll probably run a business and build a product, right? So I've had startup experiences before, right? So I was the CTO of a local startup in Raleigh that didn't become a unicorn, but it still turned out reasonably well. They showed it was a student medical record app, right? And funny enough, and my younger son went to middle school at Care Academy. One of the first things that they did was, hey, you got to complete your medical records and go sign up with this app. And I was like, oh, Magnus Health app. I know what that is. Right? So I think subconsciously I always wanted to do something, right? So it's just with the right opportunities and with the right product, and this is finally my shot, right? So with JupiterOne, I was with other startups before, but this is really a very different situation this time around.
Can you elaborate on what those differences are, at least as you perceive them?
Yeah. There's plenty, right? So the early startup experiences I had, and even before that one, I had a startup experience that failed, right? Which is not necessarily a bad thing now, kind of thinking back, right? So, it wasn't great. Everybody was sad and all that, but lots of lessons learned and know what not to do and so on, right? And it was very difficult. That was in the early 2000s, and raising money as an East Coast company in the dot-com bubble was just impossible,
Okay.
right? So we struggled to raise even $2 million in a Series A funding at the time, and of course, then later on ran out of money, and then we had to sell the assets and fold, right? And then after that, had the other startup experience with Magnus, and that was pretty decent, right? So I wasn't a co-founder, but I was number three, and joined with the other two co-founders as the first engineer and then the CTO, right? Built up the engineering team and developed the product and all that good stuff. So the dynamic today is just very different, right? So I think this round, there's a couple of key differences, right? So one is I've accumulated so much more experiences over the years, both from an operator and a practitioner and a technologist, right? All three things, right? Because I've run large teams and P&Ls and large organizations, and I've had both somewhat successful and not successful experiences previously at startups. And this time, doing this again on my own is quite different, right? And the fundraising dynamic is also different, right? So somehow the whole COVID situation kind of enabled this to be a little bit easier, right? So just from a fundraising standpoint. So I raised the Series A round, I think this was about 10 months ago now, last year, and talked to a lot of firms and VCs. And, can you imagine that in normal situations, I'll probably have to fly out to the Bay Area multiple times, in the span of 2 or 3 months and meet with multiple folks. I also had VCs told me this afterwards, and they were like, we had never imagined a time where we would hand out tens of $1 million without seeing that team in person. You know, so that just somehow made this easier, right? Just logistically easier, and I think the market is also good, right? So we're in a strong market today rather than the last time around, right? So it was just the market just tanked, right? We're in a recession, right? So at the time, then it's just many things are different. Yeah, and I also the other thing is I definitely don't want to undersell a lot of the support from my network, right? My early customers, right? And I think a lot of that is it's a lot easier when you have these relationships and connections built and people that trust you, right? So, and I had the fortunate enough to have other CISOs who trust me and become early adopters of my product, right? And I have friends in the VC community who helped me in fundraising that again that previously I just didn't have, right? So I think all of those, it's not just one thing, but there's all of these combined make today's and this round of the experience so much different.
So you're still a relatively young guy, but if you feel like if you had to do this, call it like a decade, if you're a decade younger, do you feel like you would have all the requisite components to pursue this journey?
Probably not. Yeah, so I think it's a matter of accumulating those, right? So I think first time founders are definitely very hard, right? Because you don't have the credibility, you don't have the network, and you have to constantly prove yourself to everyone, right? So I think this JupiterOne certainly is my first time of building this completely as a company myself, right? So previously in the other startup experiences, I wasn't a co-founder, right? But then in this case, but even though that this is my first one as the founder, um, I still had those network and experiences and connections that I wouldn't have had, right? So a decade ago.
So in your current position now, you've had your experiences from, I guess, being in a lot of large or operations as well as a lot of small ones, and then you've also had a connection to people in Silicon Valley and other places for funding. What about the construction of your current team? Like, how'd you build that team?
Yeah, so and this was a lot of that credit goes to the team at the previous parent company that we had, right? So with a little context, right? We actually spun out from another company, right? So I mentioned that I joined as a CISO, right? So we built JupiterOne internally to start with, and created a subsidiary business unit and a subsidiary LLC company to go to market with a product, right? So I had the benefit of some of the engineering resources at the parent company early on, right? So that was very fortunate to work with, the parent company and Don Brown, the previous or the founder and CEO of that company of Lyfomic, right? To get some of these off the ground, right, up and running. And many of those engineering resources are still with us today, right? So my head of engineer, Phil, right, and he came from that previous company, right? So with me together, right? So a few of us started. I think there was a handful of us started from there at the very
So when you
beginning.
split off from your parent company, how'd you handle, like, did you fully split off all of the financial details, or like now you have to self? Okay, I see. Did,
Yeah,
when those events happen, do they give you like a lump sum for equity in the company, or like how does the initial, I guess, funding work to pay for everyone's compensation?
yeah. So those are not disclosed, all right? So those are, but in general. the idea was a complete spin-off, right? So an asset purchase and asset transfer essentially, right? So all of the financials are separate. All of the intellectual properties are now separate, and it was basically very clean, right? So they're definitely still an investor as part of J1 continuously, and they're still a supporter and a partner of us, right? And going forward, so it was a win-win at the end of the day.
Gotcha. Were you were you involved in that conversation as the prior CISO, now I guess founder, in terms of pushing the like conversation in one way or the other, or were you like happy to support either like reality of you staying integrated with the parent company versus you spinning off?
Yeah, I was
Okay,
pushing for the spin-off, right? Because I think it was the right thing to do, and for the growth and the focus of JupiterOne. And there's just a lot of other reasons I was very much supportive
gotcha.
of that.
And how so once you were like given that change of role, did much of the company culture change? Like, did the company principles change? Like, what changed and what didn't change?
We had a very strong culture to start with, and I think it certainly changed quite a bit, right? So I think it was we've actually just earlier this year just kind of realigned all of our core values and cultures here, right? And the vision and the mission are certainly different, and some of the approaches are different, right? So how we handle finances are probably a little different as well, right? So there's subtle differences, but enough to define our own
Okay.
culture.
And what can you talk about that culture? Like, what are some of the pillars of it?
Yeah, so there are kind of four core pillars of the J1 culture, right? So we sum that up in 4 words. And I think these are both external facing and how we go to the market and engage with customers, and also how we engage ourselves internally, right? So the four things are these four, right? So the four keywords, shine, we shine, we accelerate, we empower, and we invigorate, right? So we can kind of double click into that and see what those means, right? So do you want me to go deeper into
Sure.
those? Yeah, so here. If you go to our company website, and you will see those right in the company page of the JupiterOne.com website, and basically those four things, right? So first one, we shine is we win the day with passion and empathy, and what we want is we want to show up and to ourselves and to our team members and to our customers and bring our best selves to work every day, right? And what we want is we're inspired to make an impact through the passion and our drive and consideration for each other, and we're always willing to go the extra mile for our team members and for our customers. And what we want as part of that core pillar is we want to make the world a better place one day at a time, right? And the second one is accelerate, right? So this speaks to the technology and the business execution part of it. And what we want is we want to innovate with purpose, right? So we want to embrace change. We want to move fast. We want to deliver innovations and creativity in our products to our customers, but in a meaningful way, in a thoughtful way, right? So we don't want to just go off and just do it because, oh, we think it's cool, but nobody wants it, and time, right? So, but what we want is we're not fearing of failure, and at the same time, we want to strive and challenge the status quo, right? Because there's a lot of things that we are doing differently, both as a company and as a product, and we challenge people to do it differently and think differently in a more modern approach, just like that manifesto that we went over early on, right? So it all goes back to how can we do this in a meaningful and purposeful way without waste and continue to innovate every day. The third one is empower, right? This is being accountable, right? Being accountable to our teams and our customers. we think are that we're all leaders, right? So every single one of us in the organization are leaders, and we're also ambassadors, right? So to the community, to our customers, and to the industry, right? Because again, right, so we're here to embrace change, right? So to challenge some of the old ways of thinking and working, and but above all, right? So we're a team, and we're committed to our customers and each other. And what we want is, we face obstacles and challenges every day, startups and or in any roles, right? We don't want that to back us down, and we're facing those head on with grit and with grind, and we're gonna find solutions to deliver excellent and exceptional results every time. And we're gonna jump every time we face hurdles, and we're not gonna back away from the fire, but we're gonna run to it instead. So that's how we empower. And the last one is invigorate, right? So this speaks to more of the day-to-day culture, right? So what we want is not just a, hardworking. This is not a sweatshop, right? So even though many aspects of that, we work super hard. Right? Everybody on the team works super hard, and our customers can attest to it. Just the amount of engagements and how fast we deliver features and so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, we want to have fun while doing it. Right. So, and fun for us, or invigorate for us, is a connected, transparent, and fun workspace. Right. It's not just, hey, we're all having happy hours every week or having drinks with each other, but also it's the transparency. Right. Transparency to each other, and like, for example, we have bi-weekly all hands. Right. So we just talk about all the things very as transparent as we can, right? So business numbers and results and finances and challenges, and we're being very transparent to customers as well, right? So what are we doing? When can we deliver things? And when can we commit to certain things, and so on and so forth, right? And other part of the invigorate is the fun part, right? So we want to be fun for us, right? So we want this to be a very fun environment to working. But even from a product experience standpoint, right? So we want to have a little bit of that personality into the product as well. So it's not just your typical boring user experience or user interface that you see. That is something that is more unique, and that we want the product to be something that you want to use, right? Not just something that you have to use. So I think that pretty much sums up our culture.
That's cool. Do you have stories that, like, I guess, turned into how those cultural values became cultural values? Because I think each company highlights different. Like, I think every company generally values the same things, but they choose to highlight it differently, or they choose to focus on specific pillars. And you named four. Like, how did you, like, why those four? What were some other things that might have been considered, but you chose to exclude for specific reasons?
Yeah, you're right, right? So there are many things, right? So there are many other things that goes into the culture, but we think these four are what's more important, and what are the things that we are already practicing, and what defines us, right? So in many day-to-day interactions, right? Like for example, we put out a blog post a couple of weeks ago that just highlights how the J1 team serves the community, right? So this is just outside of the workplace, right? I know this is a thing that many large organizations do, right? So charitable type of and community service type of work. But even for us, we don't have an official kind of community service or charitable type of program. We're so small, right? So, and we're not at that level yet. But when we're just kind of asking around randomly and say, hey, every J1 team, then we started a Slack channel and share some of your stories of your community work, and what are you doing on a Saturday, type of things. And we got all of these amazing stories that are just so remarkable. We have people who donate plasma and find a match that actually saved somebody's lives, right? And those type of things, and regular volunteers at the shelters and food banks and all of those, and all of these amazing stories are part of just part of the invigorate, part of the accountable, right? So not just to us as a company, but to the community as well, right? So and as we're going through our values, right? So we picked out all of those things that are the most meaningful for us as individuals in the organization, but also are the things that we want to continue to define us as a company, as a brand out there in the market.
So you have connections and experiences that help you grow the company. At what point did you have to learn how to, I guess, do things like learn new skills as an entrepreneur on your own? For example, you are able to sell to, I guess, your past connections if you had a past relationship with them. But how about the transition from selling to people you know to selling to people you don't know?
Well, there are so many things that I learned along the way, right? There are so many things I'm still learning. And I think the sales and go-to-market side is certainly one, right? So I think part of that is, with even with connections, it's not like, hey, somebody bought JupiterOne just because they know me, right? So we still have to demonstrate the ability of the product, and we still have to deliver. But of course, the connection helps when they feel like this is not a complete unknown entity, right? So if something's not working, I will personally guarantee to resolve it, right? So there's that type of trust that otherwise wouldn't have, right? So with a unknown little startup or vendor, right? So that's why I think most startups they always sell to friends and families and networks and networks of networks first. Now, of course, then beyond that, it really is about the right go-to-market and the right message and positioning and the right product features that deliver those things that really make sense and meaningful to customers, right? And also how to get the best meaningful value in the shortest amount of time. And especially with JupiterOne, it is a platform that is a knowledge base for your digital organizations. So it's almost like having an Alexa for your digital side, right? For your corporate side and the IT and security. So it's that in itself presents its challenges. Like, for example, if you ask the question, what is Alexa? What do you do with it? If you ask me that question, I'll be like, oh yeah, I use it and to primarily to ask for weather. That's what I do every day. Hey Alexa, what's the weather today, right? And that's like the number one thing, right? But then if I ask you or somebody else, we'd be like, yeah, I use it to buy stuff on Amazon, right? Or I use it to set reminders for me and more of a personal assistant. So there are so many different things, and it's very similar in JupiterOne, right? So people can use it for just for visibility, but people can use it for vulnerability management and many other things, incident response and so on. So I think it's a long way of saying that what we have learned over time is we have to understand the customer's challenge and not to be too broad and not to boil the ocean and focus on what really matters for them. Because what really matters for me doesn't help, right? So I want the product to do all these things. If it doesn't work for you, it doesn't matter, right? So what I like doesn't matter. It has to be what you like. So and that's one of the things that we learned a lot, right? And we certainly would want to continue that kind of focus and deliver features that are meaningful as we continue to go to market.
So when you're building the MVP and you're choosing which features are the most critical to users, how many interviews did you have with potential like customer persona type companies, and how did you choose to prioritize them?
Not a lot, to be honest, right? So I think this was the benefit of me being the practitioner for so long, right? So I basically said, hey guys, you got to trust me on this, because I've done this for so many rounds, and I kind of know I may not be 100% right, but I think I'm 90% right. So let's just go that 90%, right? But we did talk to customers, right? So we had customers that are smaller with more compliance focused needs, and I've had a lot of conversations early on with the CISO of Reddit, right? So Sean Callatt, and then he's looking at this like, oh, it's JupiterOne is the next generation CMDB, cloud configuration management database, right? So there's a lot of discussions that steer towards that. And then later on, we have our design partners of Databricks and HashiCorp, and we got a lot of feedbacks from them, right? And we continue to build out those features and capabilities and improve it. But I would say that the MVP, the true MVP version, it was 90% built on what we need, what I needed internally for
I see.
for my own operations and challenges in the past.
And then when it comes to pricing, I noticed that you have a like three tiers. It's kind of a like freemium tier, a middle tier, and then an enterprise tier. How did you choose the price point such that the unit economics work for both your business as well as the customers?
Yeah, that's always a challenge, right? So we're continuing to evolve that, right? So because we certainly have our own cost of running the infrastructure. This is a complete SaaS model, right? So it's not like, hey, I'm selling license and then everything else is profit, right? This is not that. It's a SaaS model. It's easy for customers, but that means that we have to absorb all the
Right.
infrastructure and the operational costs in maintaining it, right? So I think that's sort of a constant work, a continuous work that we need to continue to tweak and deliver, right? So on one hand, we want to optimize for lower cost and hopefully kind of pass on that benefit and lowering the cost to customers over time, right? And but at the same time, then we also have the luxury of being a SaaS platform. Then we have our most of our revenues coming from larger organizations paying customers, right? So, and another thing that I fundamentally believe is I want to help other startups just like us, right? And I think a lot of organizations are sort of below this, what I call the cybersecurity poverty line, right? So they just don't have the resources to access good solutions to do security the right way. So they ended up trying to check the boxes for
I see.
compliance, right? So that give us the ability to offer these different tiers, and we say, hey, you're a startup, you're very early, and you have minimal resources. Go use it for free, right? And we have excess capacity anyway, right? Because we have things just sitting there, and and we can leverage that, right? For that, it won't break the bank, won't break our business model, right? So then that's where the three tiers are: the enterprise, middle tier, and the completely free tier.
If you had to just like, if you had to give me a ballpark number in terms of like, what's the percentage of users that fall into any like one of those three buckets? Do you have a like rough number on the top of your head?
I think it's a pretty even
Okay.
split, right? So I think we have about half of our users are enterprise and mature mid-market, I would say, right? So like late stage startups, right? Series D or E or later, or early IPO startups, right? We have a lot of those tech companies that are customers of ours, and we have major enterprises, Fortune 100 customers as well. So I think that's probably 50% of our customer base, and the other half are the freemium, the more early stage startups, and we also have a bunch of customers that are completely free. That's not in the mix, right? So I'm not counting necessarily those, but yeah.
Did you have to do an internal assessment to figure out like this is how many free users we can support off of every enterprise or like middle tier user? Like at some point, some businesses just can't operate on freemium because the overwhelming amount of users might forever stay in the free tier.
That hasn't been a
Okay.
challenge for us so far, right? So I think one of the interesting things is also JupiterOne is built 100% serverless, right? So I think that the amount of usage from these free tier customers are not significant, right? So and the serverless compute is relatively cheap, so this is not that big of a concern for us. And from a core platform and data storage and so on perspective, I think we have sufficient capacity to support that on a ongoing basis. So that hasn't been a concern for us.
Do you have specific things that you wish you knew earlier in your entrepreneurship journey? either at this company or previous ones?
Yeah, there are a lot. Just detailed things, right? So maybe things like, hey, how do we approach a specific partnership? What's the right way to engage channels, right? So, a lot of those that we have to learn. And I would say that even if we had experiences before, it certainly helped, right? Like, for example, back in my IBM days, I had a ton of partners and channels, but that is different, right? So when you are a company like IBM and you engage channels and partners, and a lot of those are already done, right? So the mechanisms and the patterns are already there, right? So you sort of follow a similar
Mm.
pattern and just reestablish or go to market. But here is very different, right? So from a startup perspective, a lot of those sometimes you felt like, oh yeah, I've done it before. But if it's not like, you've done it before at an early stage startup, then it's the nuances and the differences are enough. It becomes a relearning experience.
Channels are definitely different between enterprise and startups. What do you
Yeah.
find to be the more successful channels for you right now?
So far, we are still majority direct from a go-to-market standpoint, and with our own go-to-market teams. And we have been very successful in working with consulting firms and compliance firms and audit firms in providing JupiterOne as part of a kind of 1+1,
I see.
some services and some of the genuine product, right? To make the services easier, right? To make the end result better and more meaningful and more continuous. So it's not just a point in time, that exercise, right? So those have been very helpful, and we are establishing really strong technology partnerships as well, right? So with, of course, AWS, but many others, right? Like Cobalt and Tenable, right? And a few of those that we have integrations with, right? So we're a platform that integrates with many others to consolidate the technology and so on, right? And the technology partnerships are gaining traction, right? So we're still early in many of these partnerships and channel work, and I think all of those will be very beneficial for us at the end of the day, right? So we're in this as an industry, as a community, right? So we certainly cannot do this by ourselves, right? So we have to rely on partners and channels to go together.
Out of the partnerships that you have today, are there any partnerships that were formed that you didn't have a prior connection to, either through, like, I don't know, either a like second or third degree connection?
That's an interesting one. I have to think back, and there has to be a starting point, or the meaningful conversations. I think always started with some connection. I would say, right? So maybe it's not me directly, right? So maybe it's my CMO, maybe it's my CRO, maybe it's my investors, right? Enrique or from Bain, or Chen Shi from Rain Capital, right? So I think it has always been more of a connection driven
I see.
type of things, right? And even if it was, hey, we run into somebody at a trade show, right? So RSA or Black Hat, and we started chatting and started building that connection before we started forming a partnership, right? And I think we're not yet large enough to a point where it's not like, oh, Salesforce, right? Or people who's kind of jumping on
Right, right.
board, and right, or ServiceNow, that people are just signing up for the partner program, right? So we're certainly not at that stage yet.
So, how, if you were to give advice to other entrepreneurs in the realm of creating partnerships, do you have anything to say on the topic?
I think, yeah, be picky because it's very time consuming, and I think you want the right channels and the right partners, right? So once you have the right channels and partners, it could be a game changer, right? So it will really enable your go to market in a meaningful way. But if you don't have the right channels, and this doesn't mean that it's a bad channel or a bad partner, right? It's just maybe it's not the right time. Maybe it's not the right approach for your product or for your customer base, right? So it could be a resource drain, and it could be a distraction, right? I think that the key part with startups is you can't have distraction. You have to be very focused because the lack of resource and the lack of time that you have, right? Then and that I think is a very important lesson.
On the topic of lack of time, how do you find time to balance your personal and professional?
Man, I think that is the hardest one, right? So I felt like for the past couple of years that has been pretty hard for me to balance that, right? And subconsciously, I would like to have more, right? And I certainly want my team to have the better work-life balance, right? So we certainly want that, right? So first, I want to say that is very important for us as a company. But I think just for me personally is harder, and because I just want to jump in, right? And sometimes my CMO was here in my office early this morning, and he said, "Hey, I saw you make another commit this weekend. You got to stop doing that, right? And you got to stop jumping into the code and go do something else, right?" But sometimes I couldn't help it. I was like, hey, the engineering of me kicks in, or we're responding to this RFP that we need to move fast, right? So we have this feature that we're missing. We need to move fast. All of those things are, I think, will get easier. I think the beginning of the of course, everybody says, hey, even as a founder, you need to have the work-life balance. I think that's easier said than done. I think there's just, there's so much that, I'm invested in this, right? It's not just for me, but for everybody on the JupiterOne team, right? So, because I want this to be successful, not just for me, right? So for everybody else. And,
Right.
If I'm just working somewhere, if I screw up, and that's just, hey, I take blame. But if I screw up here, then I impact potentially many people's lives, right? So, and I think that is a very different situation, and it's a struggle, right? I'll be honest, right? So it's a struggle to keep a balance. But I think as we become more mature and stronger as a team and more resources and so on, it's going to get better over time. So I'm not too concerned.
Do you have any other like practical steps for people at the call it seed or Series A level to find better work-life balance?
Yeah, find what you like to do outside of work that give you the break, right? So like, this past couple of weekends, right? So I started building painting frames for a few of the paintings that my stepdad brought over to me when he visited, and you can see one here
That is cool.
on my wall, right? So this is a large oil painting that he brought over in a row, right? So we started doing some carpentry and woodwork and made a frame so for this so that I can hang on the wall, right? So I like kind of doing work around the house and spending some time with family and kids. I don't spend enough time with them, but I think gotta find something outside that keep you passionate, right? Because I think early entrepreneurs, and probably this is the most passionate thing that you can do, right? But in order to find that balance is you got to have another passion. You have to do something else, right? Like another thing that I did this year was I started back my fish keeping hobby. I got 3 fish tanks set up, and just you got to just find little things like that keeps you happy and engaged outside of the work.
Well, I've been very thankful for your time. I would love to just ask one more question before we wrap up our time. For our viewers who might be interested in finding out more about you or your company, what's the best place for them to find more about you or to learn more about your company?
The website, right? So of course, JupiterOne.com. There's a ton of resources about us, the company page. Glassdoor, right? So it's got a lot of good perspectives and from our current folks on the team, and LinkedIn, right? So I think LinkedIn is a good resource, right? So I certainly would welcome any connections, right? So and visit our company page, my page on LinkedIn, right? So I think those are the good resources to find out more.